As a fan of the Fate franchise, oftentimes I get exposed to a lot of common and overused jokes from outside of the fandom. Jokes about how Fate is super hard to explain and is super complex, which is not the case outside of Grand Order that requires context from previous installments. Or that Fate has too many characters who look like Artoria, which again, is done so as a joke, because that's kind of played with the series, not so much a criticism when half of the saber faces are jokes about being a saber face. But the biggest one is Fate's gender bending thing. A lot of characters in the Fate franchise are gender bent from historical records and mythological understanding. I will be attempting to explain all of them here, and give a comprehensive ranking on how good I think these explanations are for the characters. We'll be going in the order of installments of Fate as they came out, as opposed to any random order or looking exclusively at Fate Grand Order and servant number. For those wondering my views on altering the gender of characters, I'm generally not a fan, and it's not because I have anything against female characters or anything, because Fate has some of my favourites, and some of them, particularly one, are on this list. However, my issues tend to be that it can lead to people, especially with less famous figures, mistakenly believing the real life or mythological / religious figures are of a different gender than they are. It can lead to a shift in perception as to the gender of an existing legend or real-life figure, when instead they could just take a more obscure female entity from mythology or history and give them new life and popularity in the form of an awesome servant. Certain female servants in Fate have even brought a whole new popularity to female figures in mythology that were of lesser renown, with the biggest example to me being Skaha of the Ulster cycle. And I can think of a whole host of females in mythology, folklore, history, and otherwise that would be cool to show up in Fate in one form or another, all currently shown on screen. I stuck to just the main 7 classes if you're wondering, and I think any of these would be absolutely bitching to see. That may not be the right word, but anyway, we're going to start with the most famous of them all. But first, if I'm going to jump into a video game franchise like Fate, that's right, a video game franchise, not an anime one, I need to be the most epic gamer I can, which calls for a savior. That's right, it's G Fuel, the sugar-deprived, calorie-avoided, carb-free energy formula that'll help you become a true gamer. Made with plant-based ingredients in a variety of 50 flavors and loaded full of antioxidants and vitamins. If you want to be an epic gamer like me, seen here thrashing Gilgamesh in Fate Samurai Remnant, you need G Fuel. Not G-Fuel, you lemon, but G Fuel, which you can get from gfuel.com, link to the description, that lovely thing down there that all of you read. G Fuel comes in cans and tubs, both of which you can use after you're done consuming to construct an elaborate defensive apparatus to defend yourself from the incoming Guy Bullock of a particularly angry spear-throwing Irishman who decided that your inability to die when killed was just not passing the vibe check. That and the fact that you pronounced it Gay Bold, which is just objectively wrong. G Fuel does contain caffeine, so make sure you drink responsibly and not if you're under the age of 18. Use code BLOODREICH, spelt Bloodreich and not Bloodtyke, YouTube autofill search bar system, whatever it's called, for 20% off your order. That's right, a whole 20% off! That's enough to make the price of enough G Fuel cans to reforge into a golem of Visay Bron would audibly squee over moderately less brutal to your ability to survive the incoming winter upon realizing you've fallen into the Russian Lost Belt. Please support the channel, I'd appreciate it and I would love you lots. Personal. Anyway, we can get to the video now. Artoria Pendragon is one of the mascots of the Fate franchise, alongside Gilgamesh and Mash Kyrielite. She stands as the most iconic individual figure from the entire series. And no, her name is not Ultria, that name is stupid and sounds stupid. First appearing in 2004's Fate Stay Night for PC, Artoria Pendragon is an incarnation of King Arthur of the Matter of Britain, one of the most well-known figures in all of non-religious mythology, only matched by the Roman Hercules name and the Greek Heracles myth. As the first and only genderbend in the original installment, you'd expect it to have a good excuse, right? No. First of all, there is no reason from the myths and folklore of King Arthur for him to appear as female. To my knowledge, he does not possess any shape-shifting abilities to any extent, though it would not be impossible if he did in ancient Celtic mythology, as we do know that his father Uther Pendragon taught the 3 enchanted knights of Welsh mythology their magic, including Sir Menwa, who could shapeshift. I don't actually know if that's how his name is pronounced. I just kind of always called him Menwa, but it's probably pronounced like Mern or something. But in Fate, it's really just Artoria was female and pretended to be male so that everyone would accept her as king. The only kind of neat part of it is that before being King Arthur, she went under the name Artorius, based on Lucius Artorius Castus, a Roman military commander believed to have been a potential historical inspiration for King Arthur. The real reason she's female though is because originally she wasn't. In the original version of the game, our protagonist would have been the female Ayaka Saijo instead of the male Shiroemiya. And our main servant would be the male King Arthur, known today as Proto-Arthur. Type Moon co-founder Tomitaka Takeuchi convinced Kinoko Nasu, head writer of the game, to make Arthur into a female so that it was a boy meets girl story and not the other way around. Why? Well, I can't say for certain, but I think it was just because the original Fate game was a hentai game. They wanted to appeal to the audience of young teenage boys, and so made the protagonist a male to be an easier self-insert, and made Artori a woman to increase how much people would want to rail her. That's what I think, at least. Fucking cowards could have kept Arthur a male and have the violent gay sex route. What a bunch of cowards. Artoria goes in the D tier of explanations, and the explanations of basically just a historical oopsie in the records aren't gonna be rare either. Skipping to the next relevant entry, we get Fate Zero. You might be confused and think that the only genderbend in the iconic 2006 light novel was Artoria herself again, but technically, there is another. Hassan of the 100 Faces. Now, technically, this one doesn't count, as Hassan is both female and male depending on the persona in control. But I'll take this opportunity to talk about both them and Hassan of the Serenity from Fate Grand Order at the same time. Both of these two don't really count, but you're gonna learn something, so shut up and listen. All of the Hassans are based on the historical Hassan-i Sabah, founder of the Nizari Islami State, also known as the Order of Assassins. The word assassin even comes from his name, Hassan, and the name of the state, Hashashin. A highly religious man of Iranian origin, Hassan-i Sabah basically defined the concept of an assassin as we know them in the modern day. However, despite what you might think, he is not the original Old Man of the Mountain. Marco Polo gave him that name in the 1300s, years after his death. In the 1100s before that, another high-ranking member of the same state, Rashid ad-Din Sanan, was the one who originally held the title, so Marco Polo likely misattributed it. Now in Fate, this Hassan does exist. He's this guy, known as First Hassan or King Hassan, or just Old Man of the Mountain, and he's fucking sick. So what are these two, and by extension Hassan of the Cursed Arm as well from Stay Night? The idea here is that they are successor Hassans who took on the original name of the founder after he left his position, and continued to lead the Order of Assassins in his absence. So do we have any historical basis for this? Maybe. We do know of 3 Hassans to have ruled the Alamut state. From 1090 to 1124 it was Hassan-i Sabah. From 1162 to 1166 it was the Imam Hassan II, and from 1210 to 1221 it was Jalal ad-Din Hassan III. So technically, it's reasonable fan fiction to consider these as possibilities. So I'm not going to put either of these two on the list though. In the case of Thousand Faces, they're whatever gender happens to be the one in charge at the time, or whatever one you're talking to. You could argue they're gender fluid or that one Venom thing but for 100 people, but I'm just not going to put them on the list because they are not gender fluid, as that would assume that they are technically a single being when they're not. As for Hassan of the Serenity, while she does take Hassan-i Sabah's name, she's also based on the Indian Vishakanya, supposed assassins that were young women raised a certain way on certain foods so that their blood was poisonous, mentioned a few times in ancient Indian treaties. So she takes most of her inspiration from a concept that is exclusively female. I totally forgot to address Cursed Arm here, but he technically isn't anywhere close to the subject of this video, so that's why. I guess I'll go over him quickly for fun. All Hassan's main abilities go by the name Zabanya, named for the Islamic tormentors of sinners in hell as written in the Quran. Servants to the Gate Guardian and Angel Malik, they are the angels of punishment who horrifically torture those who do wrong in the name of Allah. As they are his subordinates, the punishments they dole are by his command and so are considered just. Also, the people they punish are probably in hell for a reason. And for those who know their fate stuff, they might be confused as to why the Zabanya are the servants of Malik, but First Hassan's noble phantasm is named for Azrael instead. Don't think about it. Anyway, Cursed Arm Zabanya summons the arm of Shaitan that curses people to death. In the Quran, the Shaitan aren't a single being, but a group of spirits who serve God to entice people to sin. The idea being that Allah brings all good and all evil, and that the Shaitan are angels sent to tempt people astray. Those who are truly faithful will be able to fight off their temptations and follow the path of Allah. Calling them angels is tricky though. They are mentioned as them in the Quran, but are also clearly defined as separate from the actual angels of Allah, meaning that when referred to as angels it could just be a catch-all for servants of God, but I am no expert on the Quran to be able to fully go through all the historical context behind these things. The most notable and famous Shaitan is Ash-Shaitan, the devil, also identified as Iblis. You might know him from the greatest Sonic game of all time. Created by Allah to punish the original disobedient inhabitants of Earth and a high-ranking Karub, he then disobeyed, and look, you know the story of Satan, fell from heaven, he's basically that guy. Fate never identifies which Shaitan is being summoned as the arm of Hassan, but as they were all capable of teaching curses to mankind, like his noble phantasm, and they all whisper into the hearts of man, which matches the visual of Cursed Arm's noble phantasm, it's not that important, any of them could apply to this, so there you go, detour over. I'm also not including No Name from Fate's Strange Fake, because she failed to actually be a Hassan, so she isn't one. On that note though, let's jump into Fate's Strange Fake. Kind of. You see, the original April Fool's joke of Fate's Strange Fake was in 2008, and it got an adaptation in 2009. But we're cheating here to talk about the most iconic version, the 2015 light novel series, and we do have a few here. The most prevalent one is Enkidu. Here is where I should say that when I say genderbend, I'm just using it because that's a term that's thrown around in the fandom a lot. I really just mean a servant whose gender is different to what it should be. In this case, Enkidu's gender didn't bend from male to female, but rather he went from male to non-binary. And this is something that is kind of a weird one. While Enkidu is explicitly male in the myth, Fate's explanation is simply that due to the origins of Enkidu, this version chooses not to identify as either gender. I can't really question that one. Enkidu's origins of being sculpted by the gods really does mean that it is completely reasonable as an explanation to have Enkidu identify as non-binary. There's nothing to really criticize here or even explain. Enkidu's made of clay. Clay doesn't have a biological sex. Enkidu kinda just sees themselves purely as a tool anyway, no matter how much Gilgamesh tries to tell them they're not. So I'm giving Enkidu a pass straight into the top tier of, yeah, that's alright, that's cool. The other one though is Huwawa, another being from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Humbaba, as he's really known, is weird here. You see, technically, again, Huwawa in Fate doesn't have a gender. Enkidu just refers to them as female because... Okay, so you see in this version, Huwawa is a culmination of 2,891 children merged together into one being by Utu, with only a female retaining her sanity. This just does not apply to the mythological Humbaba. Humbaba is very explicitly male. His origin is about as deep as one day he existed and Enki dumped him in the cedar forest for whatever reason. And like, that's it. At most, he has lamented in some versions that he never knew his parents and that Utu raised him. So this one gets a solid bottom tier for making okay, I'll move it one above bottom tier into at least its creative tier. Now we can move on to the 2010 PSP game Fate Extra, which gives us a bit more to talk about. And by that I mean two, starting with another of the most iconic genderbends in the franchise, Nero Claudia Caesar Augustus Germanicus. She is female because according to the 8th volume of Type Moon Ace, they wanted to trick players into thinking they were going to be using Artoria, only to surprise them later when they picked up the game. That's literally it. She's female because someone got the historical records wrong in universe. There is no other basis. Bottom tier. Francis Drake, meanwhile, has one of the most interesting potential reasons, even if to my knowledge it's never been confirmed, only hinted. That is that this is not Francis Drake. This here is Queen Elizabeth in the guise of Francis Drake. Let me explain. To those who don't know, but probably do because of this goated game quadrilogy called Uncharted, Sir Francis Drake was an English explorer and privateer of the 1540s, and the right hand of Queen Elizabeth when it came to nautical expeditions. He is perhaps most famous for being the first person to circumnavigate the globe solo, and the first Englishman to do it as well. There are others who tried to circumnavigate it, such as Ferdinand Magellan, who died midway and had Juan Elcano take over for him, and Garcia Joffre de la Wazir, who died and also the next two people to take over for him during it also died. Thus, Drake was the third overall, but first to actually succeed in circumnavigating the globe without dying midway. Now, Drake and Elizabeth were super close, with her even giving him his knighthood. That's why he's Sir Francis Drake. However, there are some theories that Drake would occasionally let Elizabeth use his ships and navigate in its place. Fate seems to hint at this. The main things being that smallpox left scars all over Elizabeth's face, which is why she's famously depicted with all white makeup. What's that on Fate Drake's face? Boom, scar. Second thing, Elizabeth was known to have red hair. Boom, close enough. The third thing, Drake in Fate is not knighted. She has no knighthood, like Queen Elizabeth, but unlike Francis Drake. While in Fate Grand Order, they explain that she was written as male in the history books because her crew couldn't see her as a woman due to how manly she is, I think that's stupid. And I think it'd be way more sensible if this was Queen Elizabeth, she was masquerading as Francis Drake, and the pirates came up with a shitty excuse to help hide the secret. Maybe the pirates see the two as equals, the same way Drake and Elizabeth may have seen each other as equals and close friends. If this theory is true, then I can safely place Drake in the "this is awesome," the absolute top tier, because I think this makes it such an interesting concept and is based on speculation that I have seen crop up before about Queen Elizabeth. Boom! Top tier for one of the best girls of Fate, I don't care if you disagree with me! Next up is the 2012 light novel Fate Apocrypha, which gives us 3 more, none of which are Astolfo if you're wondering. Astolfo is not genderbent. He is a man who likes to wear cute girlish clothing because that's who he is. The kind of guy who does what he wants however he wants to, regardless of what people think. Zero thought, all vibe. That's what we love about Astolfo, and that's why Astolfo is a pretty cool character that people don't give the respect he deserves. Rather, let's begin with Frankenstein's monster. In lore, the explanation is simply that Victor Frankenstein made the Bride of Frankenstein first due to the inherent limitations of man, which is the most MK11 Shiva way to explain it. Now, the Bride of Frankenstein within the book Frankenstein or the Modern Day Prometheus by Mary Shelley was never actually completed. Frankenstein was making her for his monster, but destroyed it because he was scared they could breed. Which is fucking weird, but hey, the monster got his revenge and killed Victor's wife on his wedding day. It's really not that good an excuse, but I will put her in the I understand tier. It is more than just, well, they got history wrong when they were writing it. And the reasoning isn't for marketing purposes either. They basically just made the Bride of Frankenstein's monster into a servant, but gave her the other one's name. I get it, it's just not a good excuse to me when they could have given her any other name, like, I don't know, the Bride. Or what would have been even cool if she just went by Frankenstein to hide the fact that she's the bride, because then her weakness would be obvious, because the weakness is how the bride died. If her true spirit origin was Bride of Frankenstein, but she went by just Frankenstein, you know, that would work. Then we get one of my least favorite servants personally, though only due to her design and not her character or concept, Jack the Ripper. This version of Jack the Ripper, to which I will only show this Ascension from Grand Order because this one actually makes her look kinda cool, is a very unique concept for a servant. You see, because we don't know for sure who Jack the Ripper was, Jack the Ripper cannot actually be summoned in Fate. Instead, only aspects of his legend can be summoned. For example, Fate Strange Fate's Berserker Jack is a combination of the concept of Jack's anonymity and legends of Jack actually being a demon molded into one. This Jack is an amalgamation of aborted children from prostitutes of the time. All the children that would never be born due to Jack the Ripper's actions as well. They all form into this being. So she's not really genderbent, she's not really Jack the Ripper at all. I can put her in I Understand alongside her fellow Apocrypha girl, but she's just weird. And then, dear Mordred. The lamest motherfucker in Arthurian legend turned significantly more badass than he had any right to be, but also into a woman. Now, with Fate, they're kind of wishy-washy as to whether Mordred can be referred to as a she, but I will do that because that's how she's most commonly referred to in the franchise, and I will continue to refer to her as she until Fate grows the balls to just outright go out and go, actually they're non-binary, their pronouns are they, them, because they're not sure how they're identifying and they're just more comfortable being neither. Now, I really don't want to tell you the backstory of Mordred and Fate, but it kind of just goes that Merlin made Artoria a Fuda, and then Artoria's sister stole her jizz and impregnated herself with it. That made Mordred as a clone of Artoria and as a homunculus. Now, I don't think I had to tell you this, but Mordred was not this in the legend. He was either Artoria's nephew or accidental incest son. Either way, he's not that. Mordred upsets me because the original concept they were going to go with was to just make Mordred into a male with feminine qualities. I really like this concept art. The bulkier look in armor, but the more feminine face, which would play better into how Artoria is supposedly meant to have masculine traits. But because of Astolfo, they didn't want multiple males who look female. So instead of having 2 of those, let's just have 3 genderbends. Sure. Honestly, I really like the idea of male Mordred. Imagine, instead of just being Artoria but edgy, Mordred was a full-on man who, as a result, ironically would be closer to the image of the legend of King Arthur than Artoria herself. Despite this, he would choose to put on these feminine traits as a way to convey not only his relationship to Artoria, but also how much he idolizes her in a way that he would never say out loud. It would be so fucking cool, and work really well with Mordred's already really good character arc and storyline that she was given in Apocrypha. I also adore this design for Clarent. It's not just a fancy sword, but looks like when it was being summoned, he tried to smash Clarent into being Excalibur like his father's sword, but couldn't quite get it right, turning this fancy sword into essentially just a hunk of steel that vaguely looks like Excalibur. But no, she had to be female. She's going in the bad category. Not even it's unique, because this backstory, while creative, didn't have to be female. Hell, instead of being a clone of Artoria, this could have easily just been a child born male who identified as female because of her father. But no, fuck that I guess. Also in 2012, we got Koha-Ace, a parody manga that took the piss out of things. A lot of awesome characters are introduced here, but the main ones we want to look at are Akita Soji, Oda Nobunaga, and Nagao Kagetora. Technically, these could all get the pass for being alternate universe versions of the characters who are not the ones from proper human history, but we'll look at them anyway. Akita Soji was the famous captain of the first unit of the Shinsengumi Public Order, samurai policemen, I guess, who were most active in the closing days of the Edo period of Japan. She is female because of a gag. The gag is literally that the illustrator of the manga was supposed to introduce a new servant, but instead just made a new version of Artoria that was another genderbend. That's funny. Nobunaga is kind of a character above gender. I don't think I need to introduce Oda Nobunaga. He's one of the most famous names in Japanese history, especially outside of Japan, and famous for both being called a fool and for introducing Western weaponry and strategies to his battles. Nobunaga is funny because she does have a male version of herself, that being Oda Kiposhi. Nobunaga outright is one of my favorite characters in Fate, and part of it is just how she handles the gender thing. Whenever asked about her gender, she kind of either just says, "Hey, shut the fuck up," or "Fun question, the answer is that if you ask me again, you'll be fucking killed," and then brushes it aside, and that's the joke. It's really funny, and at the same time, she seems to imply that she doesn't care what gender you refer to her by. So it brings to mind the idea that perhaps Nobunaga might actually be gender fluid, and that instead of saying it or being nervous about it, she just trolls people with the fact and likes to have fun with who she is. Nobunaga's base and I would marry her. Then we get Nagao Kagetora, better known by the name Usuegi Kenshin. He was one of the most powerful daimyo of the Sengoku period, regarded both as a brilliant administrator and grower of trade and local industry, but also a brutal warrior on the battlefield, so unstoppable that he was considered by many to be an incarnation of the war god Bishamonten. Nagao Kagetora actually has one of the most interesting reasonings for her female form, and it's not just the joke. In the 20th century, the theory that Usuegi Kenshin was actually a woman began to rise due to the works of Japanese novelist Tomoe Yagiri. You see, a report was found referring to Usuegi as the aunt of the son of Kenshin's sister. He was recorded as having had severe stomach cramps on the 10th of every month, and would plan his campaigns around these cramps, which has been connected to periods. His death has once even been recorded as a result of uterine cancer. Reportedly, he has been portrayed as feminine in historical portraits, and had an interest in traditionally feminine subjects, and he was given free rein to enter the women's quarters of the Kyoto Imperial Palace. Now, there are arguments against this theory, namely that female samurai leaders weren't often hidden, plenty of them were known about, and obviously many records portray him as male, but it does lead one to understand that it is completely plausible that Usuegi Kenshin was indeed female, and so Nagao Kagetora could very easily be female in Fate without it even being a true gender bend. For this, I have to put Nobunaga and Okita into the that's the joke tier, and Kenshin into the top tier, which makes me happy. I love Guda Guda. Going into Lord Elmore II Case Files, the 2014 light novel, we get Faker. Now, this is an interesting case. This character sometimes goes by the name Hephaestion, a male general of Alexander the Great's army and his close friend, sometimes also believed to have been potentially an extremely violently gay lover. However, this isn't Hephaestion. Rather, this is his twin sister, who never existed, and who acted as Alexander the Great's body double. Yeah, magically. There is, to my knowledge, basically no basis for this figure to exist. Neither of these things were a thing, but to be fair, this character is not Hephaestion, she's Hephaestion Mnemosyne, named after the Greek goddess. So I'm putting her in the understand category because, like, I get it. It's not a bad thing because she's not really a pointless gender bend. It's just, Now, the next should be Fate Grand Order, but well, Fate Grand Order's been running for over 8 years now with constant updates, and there's been a lot added since. So I'm going to be jumping around a bit. Let's look at the launch roster. The first to look at is Altera the Hun. So yeah, she's Attila the Hun, but everyone forgot she was a woman. She's also an alien who was found by the Huns one day. That's it, that's the whole explanation. Same with Altera from Extra, that's basically all there is. She's an alien, which, like, okay, that's neat, but why? I get that it's connected to Sephar, and Sephar is female in Fate, but why is Sephar female? Does this give away any idea of gender to you? No, it doesn't, and this is what Sephar is based on. So, that's all I can say, that's the whole explanation. At least it's creative tier. The next launch servant does not really count, but I'll mention them anyway. Chevalier Dion, which I'm now going to pronounce Chevalier's full name. I'm not going to ask the French person I've kidnapped to help me, because, frankly, it's not going to help. Charles Genevieve Louis Auguste André Timothy Dion de Beaumont, choke me, was a French diplomat, soldier, and spy who was known for their androgynous appearance. Dion lived different parts of their life as male or female, and eventually was able to be legally recognized as a woman. As a result, she is considered one of the first known instances of legal recognition of gender transition. The Beaumont Society is even named after her. Now, I'm not counting Chevalier on this list because the way they're summoned is vague as to whether this is Chevalier summoned when she was a man, when she was a woman, or when she was still unsure of her own gender identity, but I thought I'd give them a mention. Then there's Uchiwakimaru. This is the childhood name given to Minamoto no Yoshitsune. In fact, this means that this design must belong to a character under the age of 14. At her oldest! God damn it, Japan! So Yoshitsune was military commander of the Minamoto clan in the early Kamakura period, and late Heian. He was known for his exceptional swordsmanship, military might, and repeated successful campaigns and conquests. Why is he a she? They hand-wave it as being because his childhood is very mysterious. Yeah, that's it, they just really wanted a fanservice character, and of course named her after his childhood name. Fuck off. By the way, I still really like Ushiwaka as a character, I just don't like her design all that much, especially because the implications of her name, and the reason of her being a woman doesn't exist at all. If she was a dude, I'd like her equally. Our final launch servant is Jinke. Jinke is the famous assassin who failed to kill Qin Shi Huang. That's it, that's all he is. Literally, in Fate, she was recorded as a female for no reason. The best I have heard is that apparently the name is very feminine when written in Japanese, which I can't verify, bad tier. Also, I still like Jinke, she's basically just a prototype discount Your Forger. The main difference is that Your Forger is incredibly good at the main thing she does and bad at everything else, while Jinke is, frankly, just kind of bad at everything she does. But we love her for that, you know? That said, she did beat Robot God with a mobile phone, so... Now we move on to learning with manga FGO, which gives us two characters. The first and most popular of the two is Paul Bunyan. This is a joke. The actual joke is that she's female for no reason. Moving on. The other is Daikutoten, one of the 7 lucky gods of Japan, specifically the patron of cooks and farmers who moonlights as a frickin' demon hunter, characterized by his smile. Now, there's two explanations for this one. Either the one actually given, that they're not the god, but rather 2 women of servitude who serve him, which is boring, or the one that makes more sense. Daikutoten was actually known to manifest as a woman at times, with 2 names attributed to them, Daiko Kunyo and Daikoku Tenyo. Me personally, I want to say it's the latter reason, and that these 2 are actually Daikutoten himself summoned in the 2 different female forms that he's taken in the past. So with that in mind, I'm putting him in top tier. I like this explanation I came up with a lot more, and the actual one sucks. Now we can skip over Extella, as it didn't introduce any new gender bends unless you count its specific version of Altera, but we do have a few more from Grand Order that came out later. Shuten Doji is an Oni king, and one of the 3 great evils of Japan. Ibuki Doji also comes here too, they're basically the same character in Fate, so we'll lump them together. I spent a while looking through things, and even reading the story of Shuten Doji, and nothing points to him being female at all from what I found. His story amounts to Raiko and a bunch of fellas showing up, getting him drunk, and killing him. I cannot think of any decent reason for Shuten to be female, other than to give her awkward sexual tension with Kintoki, who is established to be awkward around girls but not guys. Which is funny, because they had an option for getting Shuten all flustered with the next character. Ibaraki Doji is a situation where arguably she may not even be genderbent. While often depicted as male, Ibaraki can absolutely be portrayed as female, as some interpretations do make him out to be a woman, and lover of either Shuten's son or Shuten himself. It was right there. I'm putting Shuten in bad, because I don't think there's any real reason, but Ibaraki goes in perfectly acceptable, because yeah, there's no reason he can't be a woman sometimes. But keeping with the theme, and not going strictly in release order, let's also look at Minamoto no Raiko while we're here. Known more so by his name Minamoto no Yorimitsu, he was a historical regent of the Fujiwara clan, known for his excessive violence. One of the earliest of his family to be known for his military exploits, in fact, he was accompanied by his 4 retainers, of which 2 are in Fate, Watanabe no Suna and Sakata no Kintoki, who became the basis for the folk hero Kintaro. Raiko's explanation for being female in Fate is that it's just related to the mystery of his birth. Does that check out? No! While I can't find much on Yorimitsu's birth, there's nothing to suggest he was a woman at all. Raiko is actually a 2-for-1 in this case, as Raiko in Fate is also the same being as Ushi-Gozen. Now this is more of a obscure myth, especially in the West, but in the tale of Ushi-Gozen no Ohonshi, the mother of Raiko has a child on an Ox Year's Ox Day at the Ox Hour. giving birth to Raiko's next younger sibling with ox horns and an Oni's face. He was so ugly that they threw him out. But the lady that was picked to kill him instead saved him and raised him under the name Ushi-Gozen. Knowing that his son was an Oni slayer, Raiko's father sent him to kill his brother, and he never succeeded. It's stated that Ushi-Gozen threw himself into a river, grew into a 30-meter long ox, and went all berserk. However, Ushi-Gozen's not female either. So even if we accept Fate's reasoning for why Raiko has Oni features to be that they just synonymize the two into one entity to make them more interesting, that doesn't explain the female thing going on. Fate also makes Ushi-Gozen the embodiment of Gozu Tenno, a male Shinto god, so the only thing I can say to suggest Raiko or Gozen are female is a Reddit comment I found with no citations that states that Ushi-Gozen is theorized to be female due to the name Gozen, which indeed is a Japanese term for a young samurai or lady, and that Ushi-Oni tended to regularly take the form of women to mess with people. With this in mind, Raiko is a real clusterfuck of a character, but I can confirm that two of these things line up. Raiko, in this regard, should be saved from the bad tier because it's interesting, but I feel like she's above the at least it's creative tier, so I'm going to put her in her own tier of it's a stretch, but it's interesting. Going back in proper order, let's get to this character. The main protagonist of Journey to the West, kind of. The main protagonist's name is not this. It's Tong Sanjong. That's the character from the book. The other name here, Yunjong, is the name of the real-life monk, to whom Tong Sanjong is based on. Yunjong being a 7th century Chinese Buddhist monk. I don't even know how you pronounce that. Yunjong Sanjong. This one goes in, I understand straight up, because it's kind of an out-of-book reasoning. While in Journey to the West he is very much male and the actual guy was male, oftentimes in visual portrayals a female would be used to represent the character, so in plays and in media. So the reason that she's a female is a meta joke about how often females are used to portray the figure, so I get it, I understand. Leonardo da Vinci technically was in the game from launch but didn't become playable until the Camelot Singularity. Leonardo is interesting because she says a few times that her gender is Mona Lisa. And in fact, Leonardo's body is the Mona Lisa because he turned himself into the Mona Lisa to be as beautiful as possible. Part of me wonders if this could be taking the theories that Leonardo was homosexual as inspiration and going with the whole, oh, he's gay so he wants to be pretty idea. That would be lame. It doesn't matter to me though, Leonardo wanted to be the most beautiful thing ever and he could only think of the Mona Lisa, so he became a she. That's right, Leonardo is your fate trans icon. Perfectly acceptable. I like this reasoning even if it lacks a historical basis. The Mona Lisa is one of the things the real Da Vinci is most famous for, so summoning himself in that form feels like a logical step to make. I also completely forgot about Orion while making this list, so let's tackle Orion quickly. That's Orion, this is Artemis. Artemis is the female deity who wants to fuck him, she took over the summoning to keep him in check. Orion is actually this hulking thing when he's summoned as himself. Perfectly acceptable, it makes sense, this is just Artemis. Though speaking of gods, let's go to Quetzalcoatl and Jaguar Man. In Quetzalcoatl's case, it's actually explained that the deity himself is male. This incarnation just happens to be female. The explanation is that because she was summoned alongside Ishtar, the very female goddess of Mesopotamia, that she was drawn to this form. The reasoning is that both Ishtar and Quetzalcoatl are connected to Venus, which is true. Planetary connections are very important to deities and fate. Thus, Quetzalcoatl summoned himself into the physical body of a woman as his incarnation on Earth, I guess to kind of put Ishtar in her place. And like, Quetz is fucking base, so I'm not complaining. I can't quite put her into perfectly acceptable because it's not a reasonable interpretation of the tale, perfectly explained with the character's history, and unlike Leonardo, this one is more of a stretch than something directly connected to the figure, so I'm putting her in, it's a stretch, but it's interesting. Jaguar Man now is weird. First of all, Jaguar Man is a pseudo-servant. That being a spirit summoned within the body of an existent person with a similar personality. In this case, Jaguar Man is summoned in the body of Taiga Fujimaru from the original Fate Stay Night video game. Now, Jaguar Man is a very complicated servant when it comes to her origins. Obviously, Taiga is part of it, but that's connected to the first game, that can be ignored for now. I'm sorry Taiga, I still love you. But Jaguar Man also takes from Jaguar Warriors, a group of Aztec warriors who were members of the elite military skilled enough to capture 4 enemies in a battle without killing them, as it was said that killing an enemy would be considered clumsy as opposed to skillful. She also comes from the Nagual, Mesoamerican entities that were humans capable of shapeshifting into their tonal animal counterpart, or spirit animal you could say. These are very commonly depicted in media, think of Kotal Khan from Mortal Kombat. Jaguars specifically connected to the god Tezcatlipoca, Both of these things are relevant to her relationship with Quetzalcoatl. She works under Quetzalcoatl in the Babylonian Singularity and collects people after Ketz beats them up, like a really shitty Jaguar warrior. And Ketz treats her like crap because she's so similar to Tez. Her final and biggest inspiration though are the other Jaguar deities of the ancient pre-Columbian Maya to which we know very little. One of which was indeed a female, Ixchel, the 16th century name of a Jaguar goddess of midwifery and medicine, and connected to the deities Toki, Yoalik, a few others I can't pronounce. So Jaguar Man is in a spot where regardless they'd just be in a pseudo-servant category, but a vague Jaguar deity could still be female even if they were called Jaguar Man. So she's going into perfectly acceptable, because I don't think this jumble of random ideas, none of which are strictly male or female or otherwise, can be set in stone as this character should be one or the other. Now let's talk about a funny one. The final boss of the first story of Fate Grand Order, Getya. Getya is not a pre-existing entity, rather he is a very interesting idea. The idea of 72 demon god pillars fused into one being. The 72 demon gods are the 72 demons featured within the Lesser Key of Solomon, also known as the Ars Getya. Now for the most part, all Getic demons are referred to with male pronouns, in fact all of them are, so it makes sense that Getya is primarily referred to as male, but there's an argument to be made that he should be 172th female. As the demon Gemery, or Gremery, while being referred to with male pronouns, always appears in the form of a beautiful woman, and if you're wondering, yes, this is probably why Rias Gremery from High School DxD is a female. It seems generally like Gremery is only referred to as a male as a motif in the book, and not because they actually are. Similarly, Astaroth may also be intended to be female. While depicted as male outside of the Ars Getya, within it he's only called by male pronouns because they all are. His name is derived from Astarte, the Bronze Age goddess of beauty, or Ashura, the Hittite fertility goddess. But that one's more of a stretch. I'm happy saying that yes, Getya is mostly male, but he should also be considered very slightly female. That said, I'm going to put him in this doesn't quite count tier. Also, if you're wondering, no, I'm not going to look at the history of the components of the Sakura 5, because they go into the doesn't really count tier, because they're female, they just have portions of male figures in them. They're female because they're based off Bibi, who is a woman. Moving past part 1 of Fate Grand Order and to the midpoint between Singularities and Lost Belts, we get Miyamoto Musashi, one of the most famous samurai to have ever existed, if not the most famous. This is not Musashi. This is. Yeah, Musashi in proper human history very much is a male, so who's this? Well, this is just an alternate universe version of him who happens to be a woman. That's all there is to it. I have nothing to say, she goes into perfectly acceptable. Kato Danzo was a famous ninja, though one we know very little about. Legends say he performed acts of sorcery and consumed a whole ball in front of a crowd. He's also said to have used karakuri puppets. So in Fate, they literally turned him into a karakuri puppet. But if karakuri puppets were robot people. Now, as you might have imagined, karakuri puppets are not generally portrayed as male or female, they're either or. So there really is no reason for Kato to be female in terms of in-universe. Out of universe, however, it's simple. They wanted to connect Danzo to Fumakataru, a figure also known as Kazuma Kataru, who was the 5th and most famous of the Fuma ninja clan leaders. He's actually so significant that he's considered a rival of Hattori Hanzo, the most famous ninja in the world that isn't some manner of mutated turtle. As Kato Danzo lived 100 years prior to Fuma, and they wanted a connection because it made for a good story moment, and well, Fuma's familial line isn't known, and also the Shimosa Singularity is kinda just like a pot of random obscure Japanese figures, obscure in the West at least, they decided to connect them by making Danzo a robot, so she could reasonably be alive at the same time as Fuma. As for why she was made female, well, it's because she couldn't be his father. Kotaru's father is considered to be an Oni, or at least one of his parents is, and most Oni are male. So there, I'm just putting this in as at least it's creative and moving on with my life. Taking a little break from Fate Grand Order, we get the anime short from the end of 2017. Fate Grand Order X Himuro's Universe 7 Most Powerful... Fate Grand Order X Himuro's Universe 7 Most Powerful Great Figures chapter. We have 3 servants here. The first is Leloy, who I mistakenly called Korean in a past video. He was from Dai Viet, which would become Vietnam. Oops. Leloy is a saber face, and this is for the sake of a joke. I actually really like Leloy and think he would make for an awesome servant. I just don't want him to be actually made into a saber face if he ever shows up in Grand Order. I'd want him to be an Arthur face. Now, the reason he's one of these at all is because of these similarities between his story and that of King Arthur, both being legendary rulers who wielded a magical sword, in Lelou's case Tuan Tien, which literally translates to Heaven's Will, that gave them immense power once they earned it, and after they were done they returned it to a lake from which it was taken originally, whereupon the original owner of the sword took it away. Now if you were to say that Emperor Qin is what we call the real-life Asian equivalent to the Legends of Gilgamesh, Lelou would be the real-life Asian equivalent to King Arthur, so that's why he's a woman here. It's a joke tier. The second is Leo III the Isaurian, a very obscure figure and founder of the Isaurian dynasty and Byzantine Empire. He was known for having put an end to the 20 years anarchy period within the Byzantine Empire, and defending his empire from the Umayyads. Why is he a woman? That's a great question. Bad. The last servant is Nietzsche, and she'll land any motherfucker like her name in a spelling bee. Simple reason, she's a pseudo-servant, so Nietzsche is still male. It's just that he was summoned into the body of a girl named Yukika Saigusa. That's all there is to it. Next on the chopping block are two more servants from Grand Order, Crown Prince Naja and Natsushika Hokusai. Naja is one of the most powerful warriors in the heavens of Chinese mythology, known by the Taoist title of the Marshal of the Central Altar and the Third Lotus Prince. Naja was born to humans in the form of a boy instead of an infant, popping out of a ball of flesh his mother gave birth to, which is just a horrifying visual. He was accepted as student to an immortal, and later fought against and killed the children of the East Sea Dragon King, when the Dragon King wanted to eat little kids. And so to save his family from the wrath of the gods, Naja ended his own life. But his teacher brought him back to life and made his body out of lotus roots. Naja is absurdly powerful, wielding a literal universe ring and a sash made out of the cosmos. Now, you might be wondering, after all that, why is he a woman here? Well, Naja is normally depicted in art as very feminine in appearance, so the way Grand Order chose to depict this is that while Naja was originally male when he was brought back to life, her teacher kind of just didn't bother to get his gender right, so bam, female body. Now, technically, Naja identifies as Naja in terms of gender, though it's more that she straight up doesn't give a shit if you call her by female or male or other pronouns. If you refer to her gender as battle-ready war toaster, she's fine. She's so secure about who she is that she'll accept anything as long as you're addressing her as Naja and not anyone else. So, Naja can go into, I'd say, perfectly acceptable. It's an interesting take on an element of how Naja is traditionally depicted. I also just kinda like how completely secure of her own identity she is. Katsushika Hokusai then. This one is interesting because Hokusai is famously an extremely influential painter and artist, but he did not shy away from the fact that his daughter Ui was also his assistant, and helped with most of his most famous pieces of art. Now, as both were super important and together, they both got summoned together in fate. Now, Hokusai is kind of awkward here because she's a foreigner class, who almost all have a connection to a Lovecraftian deity. In her case, it's the big man himself, Cthulhu. So what happened? Hokusai talks shit, so Cthulhu turned him into an octopus. That's Hokusai. This is his daughter. This technically isn't a gender bend in that regard, but he can take over her body, and when he does that, yes, it's a gender bend. This one I can put in, it's a stretch, but it's interesting. It's above being just creative, because I understand the logic of not wanting to separate father and daughter, when there's only really justification to summon one of them. You don't need to summon both, so just putting them together means you can get both in one. But it's not mega justified in any regard to historical fact or interesting interpretation. Cthulhu wasn't even conceived until long after these two died. Now, skipping over Extella links because it introduced nothing new in this category, let's quickly look at the arcade version of Fate Grand Order and talk about the two gender bends that debuted here, regardless of when they came out. Proto-Merlin is kind of a reverse of Artoria and Merlin, where Artoria becomes Arthur, Merlin becomes Merlin still. In fact, the gag goes as far as Arthur and Merlin share a voice actor, so Artoria and Proto-Merlin share a voice actress. However, I could justify it beyond that, like, it's easy, but it's clearly a joke. She goes in the joke category, but Merlin is a shapeshifter, he could become a woman whenever he wants. Then there's Sodom's Beast, which is not a thing. At best, she's a take on the Beast of Revelations, sharing the name Beast of 666 with Fate's actual Beast of Revelations. There are actually 3 Beast mentions in Revelations, none of which are specifically tied to Nero, which if you're wondering, yes, this is Nero, we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of Fate. Nero is connected generally with the idea of being the Beast, but again, there are 3. The Beast of the Sea, the Beast of the Earth, and the other one. Personally, I think this version of the Beast of 666 is most similar to the third beast, a scarlet coloured beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, but mostly the scarlet thing, and that it's seen as being connected with the Whore of Babylon, who just so happens to be the other name for the Beast of Sodom actually used in Arcade, who is indeed female. So, is Sodom's Beast a genderbend? Yes and no. Yes, in that it's meant to be the Beast of Revelations, all 3 of which are depicted as either male or genderless, but also no, in that it's simultaneously the Whore of Babylon, who is a woman. I don't know how to rank it. I'd be happy to put her in perfectly acceptable though, as merging the third beast and Whore of Babylon is a pretty reasonable interpretation for a video game. And I am aware that the actual reason she's a female is because Nero is female in Fate, and Grand Order loves to suck off Nero. Now let's look at 2 more regular Grand Order characters, the first of which is again, not a traditional gender bend, but rather an individual with a male gender made non-binary. Chun Xiong within Fate is not actually the normal one. Our one in reality is still male. This one is from an alternate timeline way into the future where they have transcended sex and become a computer being. Given this is completely made up, you'd probably expect it's either a stretch, but it's interesting, or at least creative. However, as Chun Xiong became a Zenren, as they've chosen to call them, and that is a title the real Chun gave himself, it actually can go into perfectly acceptable to me, as Zenren is inherently a gender-neutral term. So Chun did succeed in ascending to that state and thus becoming gender-neutral. The next, however, is a case perhaps of the only time other than Gemery that a female has become male in Fate. Red hair. Qitu, as she was also known, was the horse of the famous Chinese general Lo Bo. So why did they make her a male? Because she was someone combined with Lo Bo, which I'd forgive if red hair didn't come like right after Atalanta Alta, a female Greek hero combined with a male Greek animal that didn't change her gender. So what the fuck? The whole being Lo Bo thing is kind of a joke anyway, it's a gag. Why is red hair male? Screw you, bad. Now we can move into December 2018's Fate Requiem, starting with another not gender swap, Voyager. Voyager is the probe Voyager 1, who is now a male. So, went from not having a gender to having one. Why is he male? Probably because they wanted to have the mystery of his true name be more prevalent. You see, in the story of Fate Requiem, Voyager's identity isn't immediately known, and so his master speculates him to be the Little Prince or Antonio de Saint-Exupéry, the author of the book the prince is from, whose name I've butchered, both of whom are male. So really, it's just for that reason. I guess you can go into, I'm sorry Voyager, but I love you, but your reasoning is pretty bad. You could have easily been non-binary, but they had to make him a male so that the mystery could be there. Though admittedly, the Voyager probe isn't even sentient, so I guess I'm putting him into doesn't really count, huh? And finally, the last Requiem servant, Euclid. Now, we don't really know a lot about her yet, but there's a good chance we'll learn more. Right now, there's no reasoning, as Euclid was a male in real life, and she's connected to the Lovecraftian being Hasta, who is male, but I'm not ranking her yet due to lack of knowledge. Now back to the gacha, let's talk about 3 servants who follow the same reasoning. Kama, Simayi, and Ganesha. Kama is the Hindu concept of love, pleasure, and desire, manifested in the deity Kamadeva. While normally male, even in Fate, it's explained that she is female because she manifested into the body of Sakura Matao, a female. Kama even has a male version of the series. Simayi was a male strategist and tactician who is summoned into the body of the female Reina Zelmaloi. And finally, Ganesha is a Hindu god who is extremely famous for being the Elephant One. He's summoned into the body of the female Jinako Katagiri. So all these go in the same category, it's a male as a pseudo-servant summoned into the body of a female. And then there's Gareth. Oh Gareth, I do love you, but why are you a female? Gareth is considered in Fate as a female who was recorded as male in history due to her ring of transformation, but no. While Gareth in the Legends does have a ring to help him disguise himself, it doesn't conceal his identity, rather it allows him to change the color of his armor so he isn't recognizable at a glance. It's not a transformation ring of any kind, in fact it kind of takes away from the story of Gareth to make him female. You see, while Bumanes is a nickname for Gareth in Fate and it's all cute, it's actually an insulting nickname given to Gareth in the matter of Britain, because he had unusually fair and feminine hands. The whole point of his title is to be a mocking one that he proves false, a subversion of expectation. Now it's a cute nickname for her which takes away the theme of her story. Gareth, I love you, you're too wholesome for this world, but your reasoning, it sucks. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, are 2 siblings, twin siblings, iconically the only males among their siblings. I said that weirdly, the only male children of their parents, so naturally one of them got turned into a female. Why? Well, I think the reason is they wanted to have twin voice actors, and one of the twins was female. So, I think it's actually genuinely in the it's a joke category. It's like a gag. Canis is an interesting character, who I'm going to refer to as he for this video, because while Canis says they don't really care about it that much once summoned into Chaldea, I've already got to dead name Canis by using his name from when he was a woman, as that's what's used in the series, so yeah. Canis in the myth is a genuine transgender man, having gone from a woman to a male by the power of Poseidon, because he smashed her without asking if she wanted to play Smash, and then was like, ah, you smash good, so I'll give you a wish. And she didn't want to be pregnant with his children, so yeah. Canis doesn't really count for this video in a traditional sense, but he goes into perfectly acceptable. Okay, Fate hot take. I do not like Van Gogh. The fact that she is so childish and acts like a kid, but also has a lot of very horny-esque lines and lines about being deflowered, makes me very uncomfortable. Gross. I also don't think she tackles the subject of self-harm and self-loathing as well as everyone says. That said, why is Van Gogh female? Because this is not Van Gogh. This is Clytie, a female water nymph, but with elements of Van Gogh's memory and the Lovecraftian deity Volthoom. Why are they all connected? Because Van Gogh has painted flowers before. That is the whole reason. It's a stretch, but at least it's interesting. You know, my issue with Van Gogh is not at all related to this whole idea. The concept could have been made really cool, I just don't think they did it as they should have. I'd love to see a proper Van Gogh someday too, because this technically is not Van Gogh. Technically doesn't count, but it's interesting. Stretch, but it's interesting. In Hinduism, Vritra is the embodiment of drought and is the Ashura who opposes the king of the Devas. Truth be told, I think Vritra has a pretty reasonable explanation. While the deity is male, or technically genderless, due to the Hindu gods often incarnating in avatars, it's reasonable that this one just happened to be female. After all, Vishnu once incarnated in the form of Mohini, a female despite being a male god. So Vritra gets the pass, I say. Not the deepest reason, I know, but it'll do. Then there's Taira no Kagehyo, a Japanese samurai adopted by and serving the Taira clan who attempted to have old Ushiwaka assassinated. You might notice, he kinda looks like her. That's because he's literally using her body. He basically hijacked Ushiwaka's body while she was changing it, so not really a pseudo-servant, but I'm still putting Taira in that category because it's essentially the same deal going on. Kishi Hogan is technically not as she seems, for you see, this is not a male character who became female, but a male who became non-binary, as while Kichi uses a female body, it's only because they have chosen to take this form. They don't actually have a gender at all, but I think we can give this one a pass, because it's really not like Kichi Hogan's gender was ever mentioned from what I can find. He's just assumed male because that's how he was depicted. Also, as a demon, who says what he should be? I think this one's perfectly acceptable. Despite what you may think, I cannot count the Fey Knights, as they aren't actually genderbend. The Melusine and Baoban Sith are both female entities, while the Barghest gender isn't set in stone and is kind of vague, so they actually don't count. Koyanskia is... I'm gonna put a spoiler alert here for anybody not up to date with Fake Granddaughter. We good now? Okay. Koyanskia is the Tunguska event. A random several megaton explosion, now a person and a female. So the gender went from explosion to female. I'm putting this in doesn't technically count, but technically she does. Jacques de Molay. From what I'm aware, the explanation here is that Shub, I'm not risking saying that, wanted to seduce people better, so they turned the unusual random heroic spirit into a female. What does that have to do with the Nice Templar? I could have literally been Baphomet. Like, I don't get why they had to... Fuck you, this is going in bad, I don't like it. Mysterious Ranmaru X is not the same person as Mori Ranmaru. Rather, the Mori Ranmaru of our world is still referred to as Mori Yaganoshi's brother, having been known as basically just one of Nobunaga Oda's retainers who helped protect Nobu in his final battle so that he could die on his own terms through seppuku, and then burnt the building down so that their lord's body couldn't be captured afterwards and defiled. This is not that person. This is someone from another universe who is a counterpart to that one, who is still male presumably, so this is perfectly fine. This is not the same one. Dobrynya Nikitich is perhaps the most obscure character in this video, simply due to the relatively obscure nature of Slavic mythology. Within Russia, however, Dobrynya is one of the most famous heroes, an epic knight based on the real-life warlord of the same name, who tutored Vladimir the Great and led the armies of his father. He is most known for the story in which he faces against the mighty Zmei Gorinich, a three-headed dragon who is basically ancient Russian King Ghidorah if Ghidorah was actually a dragon. Though this Zmei isn't always portrayed as evil or even one gender, they can be multiple genders and they can sometimes be like kind of just neutral. But after killing the Zmei, he encountered a Polyanitsa, basically a female knight, the womanly equivalent of the Slavic Bogatyr archetype, of which Dobrynya is one of, named Nastasia Nikolichna, and married her. Within Fate, it actually turns out that Dobrynya here is actually Nastasia, and she's merely masquerading as a husband because she can. So just like Orion, this isn't quite in the it doesn't count category, as those are for cases where it's so minor it isn't a thing. I'm putting this in perfectly acceptable. No genderbending actually happened, it was just kind of, that's not actually Dobrynya, who is still male in this setting. Another quick one is next, the Irish king of the otherworld Manannán mac Lir. Similar to the Welsh king Aran or Gwyn ap Nuth, he is the ruler of the afterlife in certain versions of the overall Celtic myth, which is very different depending on what parts of what is considered Celtic mythology you look at. But in this case, he's merely summoned within the body of best girl who is a master, because screw you, Rin wishes she was as base as Bazette. I would smash if Nobi wasn't right there. So yeah, just another pseudo-servant situation. Because Bazette has been portrayed as wielding Fragarak since her debut, and this is the weapon of Manannán in the myth, when bringing Bazette into Grand Order, they naturally had to do this. It's too cool not to. Kyokuto Bakin, more known by the name Bakizawa Bakin, was a novelist of Edo-era Japan and the leading literary author of the 19th century for Japan. Born from a low-rank samurai family, he abandoned that status and made his living with Gesaku, a type of Japanese literature. His most well-known work, and the one that dictates why he's genderbend in fate, is Nansou Satomi Hakenden, known in English as the Chronicles of the 8 Dog Heroes of the Satomi clan of Nansou, which is definitely not as catchy a title. So in history, one of his sons, Bakezawa Sohaku, married a woman who would come to be known as Omichi. By 1834, Bakin lost vision in his right eye and was completely blind by 1840. From what I can find, Bakin went blind before he was able to finish Nansou Satomi Hakenden, and dictated the final parts of the novel to her. So you know Katsushika Hokusai? They basically just did that again. Now this servant isn't available in global yet, so I can't say what all the circumstances are for her being that way, but it does bring to mind Hokusai, and while lacking in originality, I can understand the logic here. See, in Fate, servants are summoned in the prime of their life, or at least that's how they're supposed to be summoned. Just using examples that have been talked about in this video, King Arthur gets summoned at the peak of her power wielding Excalibur prior to the fall of Camelot, Nazar gets summoned in the more powerful immortal body crafted for her after her original death, and Nagao Kagetora is summoned at the peak of her conquest and battle. Some examples are notable exceptions, like Canis isn't summoned in his peak body but rather his prior body, but normally it's peak performance moment. So, if it was determined that the peak of Bakin isn't actually him, but the peak of his writing, and the peak of his writing was this iconic book, then he would be summoned at a point in his life where he was physically blind. Keep in mind, his physical body is not what he was known for, but his penmanship, so it would be the peak of what he's most legendary for. So to mitigate this issue, it would make sense that Bakin would have to be summoned in the body of either an avatar of a character within that book, which does happen because his third ascension is actually Fusahime, a character he wrote, or in the body of his daughter-in-law that finished the book, and thus shares the same legendary status of author of this novel. So I can safely place Bakin in the acceptable category, even if it's kind of just a copy of what they already did with Hokusai. Hokusai is awesome, by the way. I don't like most of the foreigners, but I make an exception for her and Mysterious Heroine XX. And maybe Galfei. Voyager I don't count though, his real class is Voyager. Choifuk is the cutest fucking thing in the world and I adore her. Look at her little face, it's so cute! But I can't let my love for this cute little bean blind me. Why is Choifuk a woman? Well, she doesn't know. She outright says she doesn't know why she was recorded as a male, other than that they were people who didn't like her and happened to be historians, so they did it despite her, because they were mad that Chun gave such a role to a woman. And sadly that's all there is to it. Choifuk in life was an explorer and an alchemist who went twice to look for the elixir of immortality for his emperor Chun Chiwung, who we mentioned earlier, and never returned from the second expedition. So the only thing to ask is whether the spite thing is possible, and maybe. See, this dynasty was not one for gender equality. Women were seen as inferior beings to men, and Emperor Chun never had an empress, just a bunch of consorts to give him heirs. So if he did have a woman in such a high ranking, then of course historians of the time may have been spiteful, but that itself raises the problem. What are the chances he would have such a high ranking woman in his court? It's really unlikely, so sadly, just like Gareth, I cannot let my bias get in the way. Your reasoning is bad. Tenno Rikyu was a historical figure most known for influencing the Japanese way of tea, including the ceremony of wabi-cha. So naturally, he's a little girl with a gun. I'm kidding, of course. As a servant of Nobunaga, and especially Toyotomi Hideyoshi, it's very reasonable he'd have access to firearms of a sort. So why is he a female? Well, he might not be. Again, information on this servant is hard to find because she's not available in global, but it's suggested from what I can find that the reason he's summoned in a female body is because he shares a spirit with Komahime. Who the fuck was that? Well, she was a concubine of Toyotomi Hidegetsu. This is important because Rikyu was a close friend of Hideyoshi's. Cracks in their friendship and differences of opinion, though, would lead to Hideyoshi ordering Rikyu to commit seppuku. This same thing happened with Toyotomi Hidegetsu. Komahime, meanwhile, famously died with bravery befitting the daughter of a feudal lord. she was set for execution and lost her life in that way. Hideyoshi attempted to undo the order and save her, but it was too late. So while it's a stretch, this connection through 3 individuals sentenced to death by Hideyoshi's orders for basically no reason kinda led to the body being that of Komahime's, with Rikyu taking control of the first 2 ascensions, and Komahime of the 3rd ascension within the game sharing a body. I can't say it's perfectly acceptable because that's a lot of stretching, but there's a stretching tier. Alright, we're in the final stretch, the last 4 characters at the time of making this video. We begin with Fu Yincheng. Fu Yincheng is not a historical figure, but a fictional character from Water Margin, one of the 4 great Chinese classical novels, alongside Journey to the West, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and The Plum in the Golden Vase. Fu Yincheng's reasoning is both very simple and not simple at all. Let me introduce you to the concept of phantom spirits. Phantom spirits are basically spirits that don't have enough to become a proper servant, as they're fictional in nature. And by that, like, they're from works of pure fiction with no potential historical basis, no mythological origin, no folklore element, stuff like that. Looking to 2 of those classical novels, you'll find they're not so much that. Su Nim Hung was a figure of oral tradition before Journey to the West was published, and the monk he travelled with was based on a real monk. And most of the figures in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms of significance, like Lo Bo, are quite literally adapted from real life figures. Water Margin isn't like that though, so Fu Yincheng couldn't be summoned normally. That is outside of an event in the plot where James Moriarty, another one of these spirits, combines phantoms with each other and makes them exist. One of which was Yin Ting, the protagonist of Water Margin, who was merged with the concept of the doppelganger. Fu Yincheng was the same and merged with the spirit Impusa of Greek mythology, a shape-shifting female with a leg of copper, and she is aware that she became a woman from being a male. This is a case of it's completely explainable in lore, but there's no basis for it outside of fate, so it goes in at least it's creative. The 3rd last character is Tlaloc. Kind of. This is weird because she has 3 names. She calls herself Tlaloc, but is also Huitzilopochtli, the god of war in Aztec mythology. Tlaloc is the god of rain, by the way. Her true identity, though, is Tenochtitlan, a city that today is the historic center of Mexico City. I have no idea why she's a woman. She should really be either male, given those 2 gods she claimed to be were male, or non-binary, given she's a city. So a genderless thing given a gender. I'm going to put her in doesn't really count again, because it's hard to measure what gender a city should be, but, you know. Kukulkan is legally fuckable. I mean, what? Is an absolute clusterfuck of a servant, because the final boss of the Grand Celebration of the Fate series is a villain from Tsukihime. Now, it's really hard to say what gender Kukulkan should be. An ancient serpentine deity of the Mukatic Maya, she's very closely related to both Kukulkamats and Quetzalcoatl. In fact, the aliens who are the collective will of the South American Lost Belt modeled her off the new body of What the fuck did I just say? You know, fate isn't normally complicated to explain, but some stuff in Grand Order is so fucking brain dead stupid, I can understand why you think it is. That's the reason she's female. The aliens, who are the will of South America, made her body based on Quetzalcoatl's female one. But I'm going to ignore that dumb reason and talk about a proper reasoning that would make sense. As we know very little about Kukulkan, as I was saying, with the distinction between even the god and a real-life priest or ruler at Chichen Itza even getting blurred due to confusion, we don't know who was what in which historical text. We do know that this deity was very closely related to the Itzar state of the northern Yucatan Peninsula, likely due to similarities the figure had to Quetzalcoatl. They stopped seeing Kukulkan as a divine serpent-feathered deity and more as a messenger between kings and gods, who embodied the divine nature of where they lived. Again though, that doesn't tell us anything about gender. We do have 2 things to go off though. The modern day Yucatec Maya still tell stories of the deity, apparently one of which where they are personified as a male figure. However, the Lacandan Maya tells stories of Kukulkan as an evil female pet of the sun god, who learns to be better when a boy shares his food with her. Now I'm not going to sit here and argue which modern day native religious belief should be prevalent, and both stories are interesting and worth looking into, but this does paint the picture that in the grand tapestry of Kukulkan's very scattered and historically uncertain history, their gender is not set in stone. I can say in my opinion that depicting them as female is equally as valid as depicting them as male. So, I put it in perfectly acceptable, and the alien bullshit sun stuff I'm going to ignore along with the rest of Lost Belt 7. And our last stop in this very long video. Kashin Koji, a figure of Japanese legend and folklore of the late Muromachi period who supposedly performed tricks and magic in front of Oba Nobunaga and his retainers, of whom we cannot be certain of the historicity. Who the fuck is this? Okay, real talk. In Fate, this is not Kashin Koji. When I first read the historical description of this figure and did my research, I figured the Fate one was part of the Guda Guda side of the franchise. You know, the side all about Nobunaga, Oda and his crew. Nope. This character is a magician, yes, but she served the Fuma clan of ninja and helped make Kata Danzo? What the fuck? There is so little information about the Fuma clan that I could find, partially because I wasn't planning to sift through 1 billion Naruto pages to find it and my local library is closed. So who the fuck is this chick? From what I can tell, this is supposed to be that Oda Nobunaga era figure, but the problem is that he got Nobunaga's attention in 1574, the same time as the 5th generation of the Fuma clan, not the 1st. Now, of course, I assume him being a robot is why body part old. I'm so confused. What the fuck? The explanation given in Fate is that Kashin replaced his body parts with technology, lost his identity, and would cling to any sense of identity given to him by others no matter what. When summoned, he summoned in the identity he chose to take on last, this one being the wife of some random Sengoku general. So, she is a man who lost who he was and then took on any identity he could, with this last one just so happening to be a female. I don't know what to think about all that anime nonsense that just got thrown at me, but I suppose this makes Kashin Kojin gender fluid? Though it might also be seen as fucked up that the only reason she is gender fluid is explicitly because she's halfway batshit crazy and mutilated her own body to stay alive. So, I'm going to put this into the at least his creative category and ignore the potentially unfortunate implications of the character, given all the information we have is translated from Japanese without knowing the proper translation, and who knows what happens when she comes out to global. However, as I was making this video, I took so long that Fate Samurai Remnant dropped, and there's only so many characters to go here, so let's go through them. Obviously, spoiler alert with Fate Samurai Remnant, as it's still a fairly recent game. Saber is Prince Uoso, or Yamato Takeru, a semi-legendary prince of Japan from the Yamato dynasty, who is generally considered the 12th emperor of Japan. Primarily heard of in the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, Yamato Takeru in Fate is rather unusual. You see, while Yamato is referred to with female pronouns by those who don't know them, and referred to with male pronouns by a few others when referring to the figure of history and myth, the actual servant themselves is not referred to with pronouns by official media. Their gender segment in-game is a question mark. As such, Yamato is not a genderbend. Again, genderbend infers only 2 genders. I'm just using that because everyone knows the term. The reason here for Yamato's ambiguous gender is in the myth. Yamato Takeru got that name after he killed his brother due to his fearsome temperament, to which his father sent him away to perform an impossible task of killing a lot of people, which was achieved when he cross-dressed as a maid, snuck into a drinking party, and killed everyone. To which, amazed by his ability, the people he killed gave him the name Yamato Takeru, meaning the brave of Yamato. So naturally, the idea of Yamato having a very feminine appearance is kind of rooted in the story, so that would likely be the origin point. I don't know if I can say that's the best explanation, but I'm going to go with it's perfectly acceptable because I understand it, it makes sense. Now, none of the other servants in this game have changed genders, aside from Ushi Gozen, who goes in the same place as Minamoto no Raiko as they're basically the same character in Fate, and Miyamoto Musashi, who we already talked about. The masters, however, aren't quite the same. While most of them are fairly accurate and all other than Chiamon are based directly on a real person, well, except for Dorothea, who is more so just a made-up daughter to a real-life Dutch explorer, one of these might stand out to you. Yui Shosetsu. Yui Shosetsu was a real-life ronin and military scholar and a major ringleader of the 1651 Keian uprising to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate. Along with Kumazoa Banzan and Yamago Soko, Yui is considered one of the 3 great ronin. In real life, he was considered a highly talented youth and raised as a ronin. As an adult, he would open an academy for others to teach them as he was taught, but they were also hubs for political discussion and not just schools. He would also open another one for military strategy too. Unfortunately for Shosetsu, he and his partner and ally Murabashi Chuya would kind of completely fail. Chuya was captured and Shosetsu was surrounded. He committed seppuku instead of allowing himself to be captured. So why is he a woman now? Well, this Yui Shosetsu is a homunculus built by Mori Soken with Western magic. That's the explanation. Now, my assumption is that because she's built using Ainsburn magics, they likely wanted to maintain a strong tie to the rest of the Fate franchise, and one of the ways in which they chose to do this was to have an Ainsburn homunculus from the Stay Night timeline. However, every single homunculus from the Ainsburns identifies as female, with the only artificial male in the family being an artificial intelligence golem who is explicitly made with magic unrelated to the Ainsburns. So not only does Shosetsu have to be female to fit into the lore, but it also allowed them to model her with a similar design to the Ainsburns like Elia and Irisville. Also fits in with the lore as Justice model homunculi, to which I'd assume Shosetsu is based on, have existed since the 1300s and the game takes place in the 1600s. So Shosetsu goes into at least it's creative, because while it fits into the lore, there's no reason it had to be Yui Shosetsu specifically. So after all that, Grand Order dropped more. Okay, let's speed round them. First of all, Wandjina does not count for this video. To get it out of the way, this is really not a good look for the first Australian servant. The Wandjina are incredibly significant figures to several Aboriginal cultures, to whom the Wandjina are actually so significant that they are not allowed to be depicted without permission from the group. And with Aboriginal Australian beliefs regularly having been trivialized in the history of Australia, doing this to such a very sensitive figure and turning them into waifu bait is not a good look for Fate. However, that's not the subject of this video. For this video, Wandjina is officially gender neutral despite their appearance in Fate, so they don't fit in this video as the Wandjina are indeed gender neutral. There's multiple of them, or depending on the belief. Some believe there's multiple, some believe there's just one from what I've read. This is just from what I've read. In either case, they tend to be gender neutral. Sukatani Zenjubo was a sniper, most famous for having completely failed to kill Oda Nobunaga. He shot Nobunaga's collar armor instead of his face or chest, and Nobunaga survived. After which Zenjubo was captured and taken to Nobunaga, who buried him up to his neck and had his head cut off over the course of days using dull blades of bamboo. Holy shit. Zenjubo is a woman because now, Koji, who we mentioned earlier, changed his gender so that he'd be harder to find. I will put this in perfectly acceptable because while Zenjubo, you could argue, technically isn't genderbent in the sense that he is originally a man, I can't put her in that tier because she kind of is as well. So someone else changed it for her. She did consent to the change. I mean, she wasn't real aware that it was going to be quite so extreme to turn her into a different gender, but she wasn't exactly complaining afterwards. So it's a case of like, it makes complete sense within the universe. Finally, Typhon Ephemerus also doesn't count, but I will mention her. Typhon Ephemerus is not actually Typhon. Typhon in Fate is still male. This is actually one of the ephemeral fruits that Moirai tricked Typhon into eating during his battle with Zeus, according to some tellings. Basically, Typhon was at full power, so they weakened him with some fruits, yada yada. Technically, you can argue this is a gender change, as fruits don't have male or female parts. Those parts belong to the plants or flowers that they come from, so technically Typhon Ephemerus should be gender neutral, but you're getting way too semantic if you're going to go around arguing that. I say this doesn't count as traditional change gender, she's just her own thing. And that was the video. Here is the tier list, and as you can see, I do think the majority of these characters are excusable, or at the very least have some interesting reasons for their altered genders. While some do end up being as bad as people often joke about Fate, it's really not as many as people would assume. I think that the main thing is because the two ones that everyone thinks of are Nero and Artoria, and they have no good explanation, so people normally think of them and kind of ignore most of the others. Now for those who wanted a different video, one explaining the real life reasons for the changes, I'm gonna be honest, most of them is quite literally a case of horny bait, which is why I didn't want to tackle this subject from that angle because it would get very repetitive. Finding the explanations in a more interesting way just was more engaging to me. So tell me what you think. If you like this video, please share it around as much as you can. I'd love to do more videos dividing into mythology and history like this, using Fate as a focal lens from which to do so, and get people interested. I hope you enjoyed! Now on to the credit part. Alright, so that was finally that done. This video took way longer than I intended, like several months, and you can see that even like by the end, some of my opinions on where I'd rank things have changed. If you're curious, like my criteria for each like tier, now they're at the end of the video, and it might seem important to mention. So I had perfectly acceptable like actual explanation at the top because that's literally the ones where there's a very reasonable explanation for why their gender might be changed, but they do have to be gender bent from the common depiction, a different gender to what they're commonly depicted as, or what they were in history most likely. But down below that we have the ones that I think are acceptable in terms of like the explanation actually given, like in universe. Usually with these ones it's a case of like, they're from another world, or they are based on something from the mythology, but it's more so an interpretation that's completely unique to Fate, sort of thing, or it was changed. The I understand category is ones where like, I get the reasoning, even if I don't necessarily think it's entirely good enough. It's a case like, I get it, I get what they were going for. It's a stretch, but it's interesting is definitely the one where it's going a bit far, but you know, at least I understand the logical through line in like how you would be able to interpret things in a certain way, or how certain elements of the lore would manipulate things in a certain way. James Moriarty moment is just because there's a phantom spirit here, so she's got other things in her if you need me to explain that's the joke tier, you don't get the joke. At least its creative tier is the tier that's just above bad. It's bad, but at least there's some manner of creativity to it. Bad is bad. Not enough info is obviously because there's not enough information on the calendar Euclid. And then the bottom tiers aren't really the worst ones. They're just the ones that kind of don't count. The difference between technically not gender bent and probably doesn't count is that probably doesn't count are things that you could argue aren't gender bent at all. So like things that aren't gendered becoming a new gender or becoming a gender. So like an inanimate object, an explosion, and a city getting identifiable biological sexes and genders of their own and all that, as well as ones that aren't technically what they're the thing they're purporting to be. Technically, I mean, I guess Jack the Ripper could go into this tier, so technically not gender bent, arguably, now that I think about it, but technically not gender bent is a case of like, the character is a different gender to what they are, but the reasoning is that it's someone else, really. So like, it's someone else. And then pseudo-servant is just a pseudo-servant, you know? Okay, going back to technical gender, but someone else, and it's a different character's body, but the original character is still something. Or in the case of Chevalier Dion, technically they're not gender bent because they could be male, female, or gender fluid at any point in their life, to my knowledge. It can vary depending on what point they're summoned from. And pseudo-servant is just, including Tyra, who's technically not a pseudo-servant, male in a female's body. Tyra no Kagekiyo is not a pseudo-servant, but she might as well be. So, just a quick explanation for anyone curious. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, because I put a lot of work into this. It's not going to make back the views it's going to make back is probably not going to be proportional to the time I spent working on it. But, hey, if you could share it around, I would really appreciate that. If you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, don't pretend to. It's okay if you didn't like the video. So, thank you to all my patrons scrolling by right now. You're lovely. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can use the link in the description to go to my Patreon and support me if you want. It really helps. It really matters. You can access my Patreon-only Discord to make me say stupid stuff. Now, okay, so for this one, all I did was prompt people with a GIF of Artoria doing a little finger wag. So they gave me basically nothing to work with. Arthur, listen, there's a big ass pig, Arthur. You gotta kill it, Arthur. It took out Ireland, Arthur. That's definitely a reference to something, but I just wanted to do it that way because I like picturing regular like Arthuriana Merlin speaking like a normal modern day guy. Just like no, mate, buddy, you gotta go. You gotta deal with this like right now. Like not in the sort of oldish way that Merlin tends to talk. I just like the idea of Merlin going around, having seen the future and being like, I like this lingo. No, Arthur, yeah, nah. You gotta deal with that. Like Ireland's sinking, buddy. Like there's a third of that island that's just gone now. You gotta do something about this pig. Anyway, if you're truly a Fate fan, say a quote. I mean, there's the obvious one, but do I go for the obvious one? I mean, I guess there's like the whole trio of like people die when they are killed. Just because you're correct doesn't mean you're right, and your birthday is the day you were born. All of which makes sense in context. People die when they are killed. Makes sense in context. It's just that it's still worded badly. It's still not a good way to word it. It's just like that is indeed. He's basically saying that when people die, like people are killed, they're supposed to stay dead. They're not supposed to come back because he was brought back to life, and also in another sense, the servants are brought back from life. It's really worded stupidly, and just because you're correct doesn't mean you're right is intentionally worded that way. It's a sort of I think you can understand, just because you're morally correct doesn't mean, or just because you're technically correct doesn't mean you're morally right. It's the sort of thing you can see someone saying, but the only reason people make fun of it is because it's Shiro saying it, and he had the people die when they were killed line. And the birthday is the day you were born. It also makes sense in context. He's explaining it to someone who doesn't know what a birthday is. At the same time, I can't help but feel like that's the creators taking the piss with that one. So I guess that fulfills the second one of going on a 1 minute long tangent or whatever you want. But yeah, so that's those lines explained. I think there might be more different lines with Shiro where he says stuff like that. I don't remember if Murasan, yeah. I don't know if Senji in Fate Grand Order says anything like that, because I don't recall him saying anything like that in Shimosa or in the Atlantic Lost Bell Part 1 and 2, but I'm not.
Cliff Jumper, what's going on? Prime, the group chat got leaked.
Yeah, okay, I mean, I guess that'll do. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of this time, but normally if you watch my Death Battle reviews, people make me say all sorts of stupid bullshit when they get a prompt that they understand. Yeah. Have a good one, everybody. Goodbye.